Okay, so first of all, what has been going on historically in the education realm, particularly with people with disabilities?
Thanks for the question, Laszlo. For folks listening, I'll just say that my name is Tania May, and I serve as the Assistant Superintendent of Special Education at our state educational agency, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And so a lot of my work really focuses around your question, Laszlo. And what I would say is the concept of serving students with disabilities in schools has been a journey, and that journey continues. What we know from history is that when schools were first being set up, students with disabilities really didn't even have an opportunity to attend school. At first, they were just kept at home. There were also historically institutions where individuals with disabilities received services or even lived in many cases. And over time, through the advocacy of individuals with disabilities and their families and partners, we've seen a shift where they started to attend school. Again, that's part of the journey, was that once they were in the school, they were very often segregated into special education classrooms or even separate programs, maybe even separate buildings. And then over time, and particularly in Washington State over the last few years, there's been a real push across all of the system to make sure that all of our students have access to general education and are learning alongside their peers. What's really exciting for me to see and to be a part of is that this conversation and this journey, it continues. Because now where the questions are going is, how do we know when a student is meaningfully included, right? When they're in the classroom, how do we know that they are learning and that they feel like they belong? And what are some ways that our school teams and our educators can measure the extent to which our students are seeing outcomes in classrooms? So that's kind of the whole history.
Yeah, good to know. My next question is, what are some data or statistics in terms of like special education students and, you know, their enrollment in regular special ed classes?
I love that question. And I'll start with some of the state response and how our agency is looking at it. And I'm excited to be joined today by one of my colleagues, Becky. And Becky was a rock star teacher around including students. And so Becky, I'm hoping that you can talk a little bit about what that can look like when students are in school. So what we've been watching in terms of our data here in Washington State, and in 2018, the National Center for Learning Disabilities came out with a report on how much time are students with disabilities able to be in general education. And what we learned from that report is that Washington State ranked 44th out of 50 states for inclusive practices. So what that told us is that a lot of our disabled students were still being segregated into special education settings. The other thing that we looked at is we really started to look at who are our students. And what we found is less than 4% of our student population has an intellectual or cognitive disability. About 70% of our students with disabilities have what we would call some form of learning disability. So either a visual processing or an auditory processing disorder. Maybe they have attention deficit disorder or have a communication need, right? They may receive speech services. And what we know from the research is that about 95% of our students can be successful, can learn and belong in the general education setting when they have the right supports. But our percentage, instead of having about 90% included, we were down at about 56% in that 2018 year. So we've been trying to make some real changes in our state. We've seen some huge shifts in our data. We're up to over 63% are now included for the majority of their day. So more work to do, but we are seeing some changes. So Becky, do you want to say hi and talk a little bit about that classroom experience?
Sure, thanks. And thanks, Laszlo, for inviting us to this conversation. I really appreciate it. Alongside Tania as my colleague, I serve as the Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education Pathway Preparation. And I think your question is really important in that we want to know where students are being served and how they're being served. And there's a lot of state level data, and you heard Tania speak to some of that. First, before I'm going to talk about kind of the classroom aspect, I do want to share with you kind of some enrollment trends that we see specifically in career and technical education with students with disabilities. I think we're seeing over 1920 school year, 2021 and 21-22 school year, we're seeing steady growth in the enrollment of students with disabilities in career and technical education courses. And that could be for a variety of reasons. We certainly think the graduation pathway requirements that passed have supported increased enrollment for students to continue in kind of a sequence of courses that's going to best fit their interest and prepare them for life after school. When I look at the enrollment data around the specific career clusters for career and technical education, specifically for students with disabilities, what I see is they are most commonly enrolled in 3 of the 16 career cluster areas. Health sciences is 1, agricultural, food and natural resource sciences 2, and then arts, AV, and technology is 3. And when I look at the enrollment, that makes good sense. That actually, in terms of looking at proportionality, that is on par. That's the 3 clusters that have the most enrollment for all students as well. And they tightly align with career cluster opportunities that are tied to employment opportunities in our state, which is what we want to see, right? We don't want to see students taking coursework that may not lead to anything. So I want to share that piece. We're seeing growth, we see proportionality in enrollment, and as Tania said, there's always work to do, always work to do. So in terms of the school system and down to the classroom level, I think what I would share is that we're very interested in making sure that our conversations about transforming the educational system are centered on really being student-centered learning experiences and really contemplating the way that students are learning and how we're honoring that learning. And what I mean by that is that for each and every student, they deserve an educational experience that matters to them, that meets their needs. And so we have work to do when we have grading practices or policies or assessments that don't necessarily honor the variety of ways that students can demonstrate their learning. And the irony of that is it's just good teaching. It's just good pedagogy, right? To be able to say, how do I take these learning standards that we have felt are really important and create a variety of ways for students to be able to demonstrate their learning in a way that honors them as individuals and also prepares them for their next step, right? So when we talk about accommodations or we talk about modifications, we have to do so knowing that those might look different for individual students. And in no case does the accommodation mean lesser than, right? And we get in a lot of conversations about what an alternative might look like. And that's not really honoring the point or purpose of educating our students. And so I would say what it looks like in a classroom level is, again, meeting students where they are. And we know that that takes time and resource, including training of teachers to make sure that they understand how to take the really great resources out of special education division and really understand inclusionary practices from a systems level and meeting the student where they need to be from a programmatic level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My next question is, how is OSPI expanding educational opportunities to students with disabilities, like for more regular ed opportunities? So anybody want to take a stab?
Sure, I can start, and then Becky and I can always tag team. One of the things I'm most proud to be a part of has been the Inclusionary Practices Project. So it's been a statewide initiative here in Washington. I talked earlier about that data point that Washington was found to rank 44th out of 50 states. And that really caused a lot of self-reflection, I think, across our entire educational system. And we really started to explore why might that be, right? How did we get here? And what do we need to do together? so that we can make some changes. And so the Inclusionary Practices Project is not about something that lives just in special education, but to Becky's point, right? When we think about what are the needs of our students, our families, but also our educators, so that they can feel successful and feel like they are able to meet the needs of all of the students in their classrooms. We really started a project around thinking differently about training. We have multiple arms of that project. We work with teachers who are still in school, right? Still going through their program and haven't quite moved into the classroom yet. We're working directly with teachers in classrooms. We work with building leaders, our principals, to make sure that they feel like they have the information and resources they need. We work with our district staff, even school board members, so that they better understand the decisions and how they can best resource so that students are included. And then we work just across our whole state agency. I work a lot with Becky's team when we're thinking about graduation pathways, how they're thinking through grading and courses. We work with our elementary partners to make sure that students are included from the time they enter school. We work with preschool. We work with our adult agencies so that we're not just saying, you have a diploma, you're done with school, but are we really thinking about what does the student want to do with their life? And how are they best connected to the next step? I know, Laszlo, you've been really interested in exploring more about higher education. So that's a piece of it. Also employment, right? What kind of career do our students want to have? And how do they want to live? You know, how are they best supported to live independently, to have choice in their independent life as well? So one of the pieces that I hope your listeners will know about is that part of this project, we have 16 demonstration sites all across Washington state. And those schools have opened up their doors so that visitors can come and see what does it look like in our school, in our setting, when students are included and have a sense of belonging. And so they'll tell their story, they'll take people on tours of the classrooms, they get to meet some of the students and teachers. And so it's been a wonderful experience. Anything you'd add, Becky?
You know, I think just plus one, obviously, to everything Tania just provided for you. I think the other systems piece would be the expanding role of the High School and Beyond plan and the opportunity that we have now. The legislature has provided some additional direction to our office to investigate what an online platform at the state level may look like for high school and beyond planning. And right now, students in Washington have a requirement that in middle school, they start filling out their high school beyond plan, thinking about their future. And I think the exciting piece is that if we have a consistent experience that's high quality for students, where they're looking at their aptitudes, they're looking at their interests, and looking at what they may want to do when they leave, whether they want to go direct into employment, you know, what do they need to do to be best positioned to be employed in a livable wage job right after high school? If they want to go into higher ed, what kind of dual credit can they get now while they're going through their high school experience to do that? If they want to go into the military, what do they need to know about service? I think all of those things are exciting because we hope that high school beyond plan process starts driving more course scheduling at the high school level, which again is a tool for transformation. When you talk about educational opportunity for students, it's making sure that the courses that are offered reflect really what our students are most interested in and will best prepare them for what they want to do and be in life.
Mm-hmm. My next question is for you, Rebecca. You're involved in the secondary pathway education preparation piece at OSPI. So can you talk a little bit about what that is and like how your piece kind of helps people with disabilities, you know, like get ready for like college, career, stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's $1 million question when you take one of our division titles and try to demystify what is it that we do here. So I appreciate the question. So I'll tell you a little bit about our division in terms of how we're organized and a little bit about the work that we lead. And if there's a follow-up question or anything else, Tania can jump in, and certainly Laszlo, jump in whenever you'd like. So secondary education and pathway preparation is made up of departments that are structured to be able to deploy resource and support to secondary education, middle schools, and high schools. And so when we look at across our teams, there's a secondary education content team, and that is really what's taught in schools. What graduation requirements are there? And if you can think of the graduation requirement, we have a leader here at OSPI that's supporting that work, from social studies to English language arts, mathematics, world languages. That team is deployed really to think about the state learning standards and what is taught in schools, and specifically support educators that teach students day to day in those content areas. Our career and technical education team is, again, focused 7th through 12th grade career and technical education programs. So thinking about the sequence of courses in career-based instruction that meet the CTE model. So there's an instructional component, there's a laboratory or shop or hands-on component, and there's extended learning component that includes work-based learning or a student leadership organization. And that CTE model is really important because we see long-term benefits for students that take CTE. They tend to persist in higher education at higher rates than those students that do not. They also tend to have faster employment rates than students that do not. So that team is really supporting the build out of career and technical education programs. And they work closely with both educator groups, but industry groups to make sure that what is taught in schools is up to date so that we are in service to students that are completing those programs. Our graduation and pathway preparation team is made up of our counseling team, our dual credit program supervisor, our course equivalency supervisor, and Career Connect Washington, the point of lead. And I bring that up because that team really is thinking about those systems pieces for preparation, right? So counselors play an incredible and pivotal role in the lives of students. We know it's been a priority of the agency in the past to increase the ratio of counselors in schools. We have had some progress there. We're still not quite there. But the role of counselor also includes this college and career readiness in the counseling model. And so oftentimes we think about the mental health aspects of a counselor, but the counselor plays a really important role in supporting students' course scheduling, what they want to take and where they want to go and see themselves. And that team is really leading a lot of the work on that High School Beyond Plan piece that I spoke to earlier. And then we're seeing a ton of progress in the area of dual credit. So a lot of legislative investment as of recent to expand all dual credit programs, specifically Running Start, college and the high school, and then our course-based and exam-based courses that are dual credit carrying. So CT dual credit, AP, IB, things like that. And then I have our learning options team, and our learning options team used to be called the alternative education team. And as I spoke to before, alternative is really misleading. So our learning option teams are supporting students learning where they're at. And that could include our homeschooled students. That could include the traditional alternative high school setting students, choice transfer, private school. That team is really deploying support mostly to parents and students that are asking questions about ways to navigate how their students learn and where their students learn at. A lot of cross-divisional and cross-departmental contact with that team. And then we have an operations team, and they deploy our state and federal resources in a way that can be most efficient in service to those that are served. And so grant and contract management really is what that team is leading. And I will say across our agency, there's a ton of collaboration that occurs, but certainly I'm proud of the work that our division has done in partnership with Tania's division. I think there's some really, really great resources that have really demonstrated, I think, our customer service role as a state education agency in trying to listen to what educators and parents and students need from our state and driving out instruction and support and technical assistance guidance. And so when you talk about kind of what does the division do, we do all of that, right? We think about our customer base and what they need and try to be responsive to that need in those areas and initiatives that I mentioned as being really foundational to our division. And then I think we have opportunity to continue to be responsive in ways that are going to serve the transformation of the educational system. And we're not short on work, right? Because we know that not every single student in Washington is having their needs met. And so that is our job, to continue to do the good and the hard work to make sure that our vision of every single student being prepared for post-secondary success and civic engagement is an actuality, and we're not there yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. My next question is, what sorts of approaches or strategies do you use to encourage students with disabilities to pursue higher education? Are there any workshops? What about for teachers and educators? How can you, how could that, this is a two-part question. So, and my next part of that question is, how can you create a curriculum that can help students gain most, out of their educational experience? So first, you can just talk about the first part of the question and then talk about the next part. Anybody want to take a stab?
Tania, why don't I do a quick launch and then you can be more specific. So I think it's a great question about different strategies for encouraging students. I think students with disabilities, all of our students need to be able to see themselves in that next step. And part of when we think about removing barriers, we have to think about access barriers. And so I think some of the things that you can see around dual credit, one of the biggest barriers has been cost, right? So cost to students and cost to their families. And so as I was mentioning before, we now have college and the high school that is cost-free to students and their families. We're seeing greater investments in Running Start. We continue to have some dual credit grants that drive resource in, so it removes or lowers the barrier of cost to our students. And that's really, really important, because if you can't access that dual credit opportunity, then really it's difficult to see yourself in shortening that time to credential, and that can be really disheartening. And the transition when you leave high school for students, it is not simple, right? It's different for everybody, and it's different in different communities, and dependent upon the supports that you have for that transition. In some cases, we know that we're setting our students up for failure, and we see 5 to 10 years before they're really ready to re-engage in the educational system. And quite frankly, as Tania had mentioned before, historically, we know that the system was not built to be accessed by all individuals. And so we have to do more in those spaces. So for our students with disabilities, it's ensuring that they are aware and can see themselves being successful and can access and navigate the systems of support. So some of the structural pieces have helped. Removing the financial piece is part of it. Having financial aid information be part of the High School Beyond plan, that's part of it, because then you're not expecting the student or their parent to go out and find the information. It's already part of the system in which they're navigating. So I think those are some pieces. I think trying to have more intentional and earlier career exposure for all students also helps, because it helps set into plan that there's lots of ways that I can get from where I'm at to where I want to go. And we need to just do a better job of honoring what all of those ways look like, because the end goal is where you want to be, right? So if I want to go be a certified nurse assistant, or I can see myself as a nurse, right? We know that healthcare is a livable wage career. It's in high demand always. And if I have a heart of service in that area, what are the ways I can get there? Well, I need to know that I could go through an apprenticeship, which might be the best set for me. It might be best for me to be able to work, get some hands-on experience, make sure I like it, and get paid during the same time. That's a great gig, right? Great pathway. We have to honor and lift that up. I might be ready to go right to a 2-year or a 4-year university. And so what are my barriers there? Are they financial aid related? Are they having an understanding of where my community supports and resources are, so that if I need extra help, that I will have access to that? Those are all pieces that we need to be contemplating and thinking about. And what if I want to end up in nursing, but I want to go through the military pathway, right? What do I need to know about taking the ASVAB? What do I need to know about entrance, physical requirements, et cetera? Who can I talk to? So those are all pieces that I think are really critical when we think about how you encourage students to be prepared, ready, and supported for their next step when they leave high school.
Yeah, totally agree with everything Becky said. You know, when we think about transition services, right, and those supports for our students with disabilities, specifically intended to help them get ready for their life after school. A couple things from your question, brought a few examples to my mind. So one was, we're trying to make sure that our schools have the training information they need to support students, and also to maintain those high expectations, right? We don't want something I call gatekeeping, where we make an assumption about a student's path. And so we don't give them all of the information, right? We want our students to be exposed to all of the options. We also have worked in our state to discontinue a graduation pathway that was only for students with disabilities. Because as Becky said earlier, right, when we start right from the beginning at saying we're going to do something different, that brings concerns to us. What we're hoping is that we're universally designing graduation pathways that are available to everyone and that have enough flexibility that everyone can see their dreams through that pathway. We also have things like case studies. We have examples on our website of what this can look like for different types of students so that teachers can use those as examples when they're having their meetings, their individualized education program or IEP team meetings. And then I do know too that a lot of this work happens at the school level. So our transition teachers are inviting colleges into their classrooms. They're taking students on visits to colleges so that they can see. They're having them connect with disability services in our community colleges and in our four-year universities. And then, so there's the classroom. There's also what's happening at the state. I have been part for many years now of a group called the Transition Collaborative. And it brings together not just our agency, but all other agencies related to transition. So the Developmental Disabilities Administration, or DDA, and the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, DVR. And we work together to figure out what parts of their services can come into the schools so that students have are ready for that transition, right? They're having support from the adult world and learning about the adult world before they leave school so that it's not a surprise for them and their families when that time comes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my next question is, what impact does post-secondary education have on the disability community in particular? Who wants to?
I can share, you know, one of the data sites that I use a lot when I'm thinking about this kind of question is our Educational Research and Data Center. They're one of our partners here in Washington State, and they look a lot at the comparison of just post-school activities for different groups. So they look at all students. Are they enrolled in a college 1 year after school? Do they persist, right? Meaning, do they stay long enough to get a degree and to finish? And then they also do comparisons long-term. They look at wages. They look at hours of employment over time across all of those groups, but also based on what kind of pathway a student follows. So, you know, in terms of your question, the impact, I think it's similar across all populations, that when we have higher education, right, more education, we see higher hours worked, we see higher wages. What I would say is the reason that's impactful for our disability community is that that has even more impact, because what we see when there isn't further education is that our students with disabilities tend to be placed in jobs that have lower wages, and they just don't have as much opportunity to things like management positions. So it's very important that they have access to those post-secondary education opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would, Tania just cited again that really great resource with the ERDC looking at long-term outcomes for individuals. And I think you can generalize, and it's true for individuals with disabilities as well, the difference between somebody who does not earn a high school diploma, but then those who do, or who do a completion program. There is a wage difference, right? There's a lifetime wage difference there. There's a wage difference that is a little bit slighter than it used to be. Between a student that gets their diploma versus gets a 2-year degree. And again, then that wage progression gap continues to get bigger and bigger for students to about the 4-year university track, right? That degree is going to have longer lifetime earnings for an individual. I think the other piece that's really interesting in terms of data that we've contemplated and looked at is the role of employment. And so that's also really, when you talk about post-secondary opportunity, really having quantifiable or transferable skills that are built and can be articulated, that's really important. And that starts with getting early work experience. And so we do know that our students that have a job while they're in high school that work less than 40 hours a week, but more than 0 hours a week, actually have better persistence rates in higher ed as well. And so all of those factors, obviously, if you start earning younger in age, you're going to have better lifetime earnings as well, more productive to the economy, more productive community, et cetera. And those pieces are all really important. We don't want to see having individuals leave our system without a plan or without the supports that they need, not get the educational opportunity, not get the work opportunity, and continue a cycle of potentially living under wage or in poverty when they have skills, they have the ability to work and be productive, and they have the interest, and the system just really isn't responsive to that. So I think those data pieces are really important, and that's what I appreciate. One thing I appreciate about being at OSPI is we're constantly with our partner agencies, as you heard Tania mention, looking at as much available data as possible to inform kind of shifts and changes for us at the state level.
Mm-hmm. My last question is, what can be done at the state, federal level to get more special education students not only involved in regular ed, but also post-secondary education?
That's a big question, and I think a really good one to kind of think about how everything we've talked about today. So I'll try to answer those separately, although they're very connected. I think the way we begin has such an impact on where we end up, right? No matter what we're talking about. So for our students with disabilities, what we have seen in the past is that at a young age, if they are removed from their general education classroom, then that meant that they're not learning the same content that their peers are, right? They were going to another room. They were working on what we call remedial services, right? Maybe a lower grade level or a different kind of text. And then over time, so there was a gap. Every year that they're removed more and more, and they're missing more and more of that core curriculum, that gap widens. So when you think about school versus post-school, if a student has moved through their entire academic career in a separate setting and not learning at grade level, then it makes it harder for them to be ready when they leave the school system to step into an employment role that's integrated, right? A competitive integrated employment, which is what we hope for everyone. So that piece of inclusion, that piece of making sure that we're protecting the right to have access to core content and maintaining that year over year for the students, we want to focus more on making sure they have the right accommodations for access, so that they can stay in the classroom, learn alongside their peers, and continue to grow their academics, all toward that end of hoping that they are college ready, career ready, and ready for those next steps for them. So at a state level, those are the things that we're focused on. Thinking differently about how we're funding professional development for our teachers, thinking differently about how we work across our work, so like Becky and my team, as well as others in OSPI, but also the agencies outside that also work with students and families. Our school partners, we want student voice included in this. Are we asking students what they want and what they need from us? And then also, of course, our families. And then at a federal level, I guess what I would say is it is important for us to remember that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act calls for the federal government to fund 40% of the costs of special education. And it has never come close to that 40%. I think the highest percent that they provided ever was 15%. And I think we're closer to about 13.5% now.
Mm-hmm. Anything you would like to add, Becky?
Good job. It's hard to find anything great to add, but what she didn't say is that she alluded to that I would say is federally, it would be very helpful if they funded to the federal law so that the resources can be provided to students with disabilities as intended.
Mm-hmm. Yep, those are fair points.